Welcome to the Firebelly Social Show. We're focused on talking to food and beverage brands that are on a mission to make the world better.
Hey, everyone. Duncan here with another episode of the Firebelly Social Show, where I chat with founders and leaders of mission-driven food and beverage brands. And before we dive in, I want to thank Firebelly Marketing for sponsoring today's episode. At Firebelly, we help food and beverage brands bring their mission to life through strategic, engaging social media marketing. If you're ready to create community, build brand love, drive retail velocity, visit firebellymarketing.com to learn more. And today I am especially thrilled, and I got to give a shout out to Samuel Anderson because I wouldn't have come across today's guest if not for him. I'm so thrilled to welcome Courtney O'Brien, who's the founder of the Outlier initiative. And let me tell you, she is a luminary. She's just amazing. She is a brand strategist who helps ambitious growth stage beverage brands carve out their space in the market using Fortune 500 level strategies. So it's like this. Courtney's a secret weapon on a startup friendly budget. And before she started this company, she led branding efforts for major names like Coke Zero, Apothic, and she learned firsthand how to turn products into household names. I mean, literally growing billion-dollar brands. And now she's using that expertise to empower challenger brands, helping them define their identity, connect with consumers, and build foundations for long-term success. Courtney, I am so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And you did a great job with that whole sales pitch. Nice job.
I got you. I mean, but let me ask you, the first question is, you have worked with some truly astounding names. I mean, Clos de Bois, Dark Horse, Apothic Red, Coke Zero. I mean, these are big names. You know, you worked with some of the biggest names. What made you decide to do your own thing?
You know, you get to that point in your career where you say to yourself, you want to make a difference. And I have had the pleasure of really feeling like I was making a difference on these large brands. But everyone I know kind of gets to that point in their career where they want to do real good. And so you really have to think to yourself, what's doing real good? And to me, it's working with the people that really could move the needle using my skills. You know, do Coca-Cola and Gallo need Courtney O'Brien? I mean, they could benefit from it, and they have, but I think who really could benefit from it are the founders and the smaller brands that just don't have the resources and the marketing skills sometimes to understand how to compete against these guys and eventually get better products on shelves that'll benefit all of us. So that's why I did it.
And you know, I recently heard this from my cousin, and he said, you know, he goes, the big brands, they can't innovate at the pace and with the agility that the smaller brands work with. And I'm thinking that's the reason you refer to them as challenger brands.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have had a quite amazing experience working for these large companies. I remember when I moved over to Coke, I worked on Evian before I moved to work for Coke. And I moved into, you know, giant Coke. And my friends at Coke were like, well, how do you like it now, Courtney? And I'm like, I love it. It's super entrepreneurial. And they said, are you talking about the same company we're talking about, like entrepreneurial Coca-Cola? And I've just had this, career experience at these huge companies where for whatever reason, and I started to think that maybe I have something to do with it by the time it happened for like the fifth time, I'm flying a little under the radar and treating things like I'm on a mission. Me and my team are on this crazy mission from God, and people don't notice until it's like, holy crap, why is that brand up 30? And really understanding how to kind of work the system. And I've had the ability and the blessing sometimes with these larger companies to just go ahead and pursue my idea, which has been not the norm. It's really been amazing.
That's phenomenal. As I was doing my research, I noticed that you are focused on helping the underdog win. And I really wanted to explore that with you. Tell me about that philosophy.
Well, that's always been what I've done. So I find it kind of boring to work on a brand where everything's going right. You know, even when I was interviewing for full-time positions, I would always ask, I don't care that the title is CMO or VP of marketing. What's the problem we're trying to solve here? What's the situation you're in? I'm a fixer. So I was, working for these big companies, there's plenty to fix. Coke Zero was not supposed to be big. Everyone thinks it's always, it's like working on Diet Coke now, but it wasn't at the time. It was tiny. There were many other things being thrown at the wall at the same time. And most of them did not win. And this was not expected to win either. Apothic was supposed to be a tiny little brand that wasn't supposed to become the number one red wine on the continent over $10. So that's been my experience. When we did the acquisition of many of the Constellation brands at Gallo, many of them were down significant double digits for years on end. And my job was to turn them around. That's it. There goes the assignment, like no further advice. So I'm used to that. And I like helping underdogs. People like fighting for the underdog. And I want to use my skills for good.
That's phenomenal. And you mentioned that you were when you were at Coke Zero, you were solving these problems. What's a lesson, from Coke Zero that you can now apply to smaller brands?
The biggest thing I learned at Coke Zero, and part of it is because I had the fortune of working with Crispin Porter Bogusky in their heyday. This was in the late 90s. No, it wasn't. It was in the early 2000s. And Crispin Porter Bogusky had just come off the BMW Mini campaign. And for them, and for me, this is when I was in my formative stage, marketing is 360. Marketing is not just a campaign. It's not just the promotion part of the P's, right? It's everything you do. If it's a car, it's the interior, it's the design of the car. It's not just a campaign. It's all telling your same story. So for Coke Zero, it was not just about what commercial are we going to run. It was absolutely everything. So once we peeled back the layers, and I just taught a whole case study on this to a college class at Northeastern this week, actually. So it's kind of fresh in my mind. We did a ton of consumer understanding. We got deep in terms of their psychology. We learned that it wasn't just about a diet soda. It was about adding something that this consumer wanted, which was a full flavor experience and the ability to have health at the same time. Health, relatively speaking, but lack of calories, right? So we parlayed that singular ownable idea and let it drive absolutely every touch point. Coke Zero started out white because diet sodas back then, and this was a diet soda, that was the language we used, were white or aluminum color. They were light looking. They were not black. There were no black cans on shelf at all. But what connotes a full flavor experience isn't white. So redid the packaging, redid everything that we did in retail, redid how we went to market. So that is, I think, the biggest thing you can steal from Coke Zero. And that's really what I hang my hat on nowadays. You've got lots more touch points for consumers in something like your packaging than you do money to drive the needle in social media, for instance.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that's something that founders in general, especially with smaller brands or emerging brands, struggle with, right? How do I show who I am and how do I show my differentiation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the biggest thing I think is the problem right now, certainly in the wine industry and in most industries. Once you learn to look through the lens like that at the world, you'll see it everywhere.
I mean, and I think that that's the piece. I mean, whether you call it a moat or, just whatever flag you're flying, why is that there's so much Me Tooism out there? It's like, hey, I can do that too. That's me. I do that.
Right.
My brand does that. I mean, you see that shit on LinkedIn all day long.
Yeah. It's incrementality thinking, right? Like our only lens without real time spent thinking about it. You naturally go to build off what you see and what you know, which leads to this Me Too or tiny bit better and 25 million gut health sodas versus no one attacking any other consumer pain point other than gut health.
I mean, that's beautiful. I just want to honor that statement, incrementality. It's like just adding on to the same shit again and again and again.
Yeah.
Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that incrementality is usually thought to be a good thing. I'm using it in this case in a kind of negative connotation of you're not coming up with any leaps of ideas when you're just basing what you could be off of what you see from your competition.
That's really amazing. And so, imagine like I'm a founder, right? I am a founder, but let's say I'm a founder of a new beverage brand. And so, I've got very little money to spend. What should I spend my money on marketing wise?
I think, and this isn't just because this is what I sell, the less money you have, the more important it is for every single thing you do and every person on your team to be saying the exact same thing, to have it be a very tight message. It's not about, I think of all the different tactics you could do as different expensive megaphones, laying on the ground. And you have to pay money to pick each one up to make your message louder or to reach somebody, right? But if you do not know what you're saying, or you're saying something different than the person next to you about your brand, it doesn't matter what megaphone you pick up. Your consumer's going to be confused. And if you don't know who you're talking to with that megaphone and you're just kind of trying to blast it everywhere, it's going to be highly inefficient and kind of a waste of money. So crystal clear messaging and understanding what the heck you sell and who you sell it to. And then, using this hypothetical situation for this founder with very little money, start in your backyard. We can go deep into tactics too. Tactics come after though, but start with what you have. You definitely have something. If you have a product already, unless you're defining it from absolute ground zero, start with what you have, who you are at your essence, and what you will be consistent with. I just posted on LinkedIn today. Everything works. It's just a matter of what you're actually going to do. I can design the best marketing approach ever. And if it's not authentic to you and you're like, sounds good, Courtney, and then I leave and you don't do the opposite, like that's a waste. It's got to be authentic to you.
It's got to be authentic to you. I love that. It's got to be authentic to you. Now, what about and I'm glad you mentioned LinkedIn, because you've mentioned that LinkedIn is a big part of your strategy. How are you building, new relationships on LinkedIn?
Yeah, well, I was kind of in the hole as much as you can be in the hole. I had 15 years at one company, right? And you let LinkedIn go. You let the rest of the world go. Your world becomes that company and that group of coworkers, especially with a company as big as Gallo. There's more than enough people to talk to in the day, and there's not enough hours in the day. But yeah, I look at myself as a brand. Absolutely. If I'm not applying these principles to myself, then what am I doing? My potential customers are on LinkedIn. Even if they're not active on LinkedIn, they're watching. Are they active on Instagram and Facebook and TV and everywhere else too? Yes, I'm sure. But what mindset are they in when they're looking at those? Are they looking at pictures of their kids, or are they, looking for marketing services? So I think it's a little bit of each. I'm starting to dip my toe into Instagram and YouTube with some video now that I'm doing video for LinkedIn anyway. But I really advise people not to spread yourselves too thin too. Like once you know and you can visualize and you can really know everything about the person that you are trying to reach and what their problem is, then you figure out where they're giving their attention to. To quote Gary Vee, where is their attention? And where is their attention affordable? They give their attention to a lot of places during the day. What mindset are they in though? And where is it more affordable than others that you could really break through? And then what do you need to break through? What's required? What's your competition doing in that environment? And what would you need to do to stand out? Absolutely, you got to apply that to yourself as much as your brand.
And what's your thoughts on, like, for yourself, for example, or for me, or for Samuel Anderson, or for Eric Martindale, or Jeff Lutkowski, all the kind of the crew that we seem to interact with a lot. What's the role of that founder brand? Or similarly with a product like Rosalie, with Wild Wonder. Like, what's the role of that founder brand?
I think it depends. It really depends on what you're selling and to who. I just worked with a founder who is not his target consumer in terms of who we defined. He is not that person. This was a elder millennial founder, comes from a very well-off background, targeting younger millennial experimental wine drinkers. It's going to take work for him to continually put himself in their shoes, or else a good marketing person that's forcing that, right? So what should the role of that brand be for those people versus him for those people? I look at it that the brand, on social and every time it speaks and its packaging, that should be welcoming in your ideal consumer. That should be speaking to them. They should be able to relate to that brand. They should see themselves in the experience you're offering, and it should look like it's for them. I haven't seen a statistic on this, but I think the consumers, the second you mention, hey, check out this brand, check out this person, check out this service, everyone pulls up their phone, looks it up, and within 2 seconds, you can figure out whether you're interested or whether it looks like it's for you, whether it looks like it's a person that is worth scrolling further on, or whether you're like, whatever, bad advice. That has to come through to that person. Now, this founder he does not live a life that is understandable to his target consumer. So how should he come in? And he was an introvert. He didn't really want to be the Jake Carls of midday squares out there making it rain and hustling and dancing in the aisles every day. But there's still a role, and it very much depends on what your brand is selling. But I say it in quotes for those that can't see. You're not just selling a wine. You're not just selling a liquid. You can't be. That's a product first look, and it's generic, and it's not ownable. He was selling absolute pristine winemaking, top processes for making sure there's no additives and sulfites and extraneous crap in the wine that's going to give you a headache in the morning. So what should he be doing? What should his role? I advise that his role should be in thought leadership in the winemaking community. He should be on podcasts talking about all the crap that goes into most wines, advocating like Laura Catena does down in Argentina for tighter standards and different advocacy groups and being on panels. And that should be what he talks about. He's the credibility, right? But he is not the same as his brand that is taking that and making it consumer friendly and young women who live in that area approachable. Does that help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the founder brand is important, for in different ways during the brand's journey, but certainly it has to match up with what the brand is trying to do.
Yeah.
Unless the founder doesn't care and the founder has many ventures, which we see that as well. It's like, they're doing them, and in some cases, almost a disservice to the brand because there's confusion around it. Like,
absolutely, it's tough. It can be done. I've seen people who are doing very different things. They have a two-pronged business and they're trying to think about their one LinkedIn profile, right? You don't get two social media profiles. Same thing with a brand. Say you launch a subline. Do you create a whole new social media profile, or what airspace and what role do they each play? That is all stuff that I do. It can't just be happenstance.
I mean, I just want to tell you, our friendship is fairly new, but what I find really refreshing is that your insights are so big picture and yet so focused. I wanted to compliment you. It's so refreshing. I've talked to some other senior brand leaders and people with similar backgrounds, and a lot of times, even with the senior leadership experiences, they get so caught up with tactics, and it can't win with tactics.
I think some clients get frustrated. As soon as I talked to a potential client for a while before we sign on the dotted line, so they hear me say this stuff, but it's still like people here's a bunch of influencers I think we should look at. My 26-year-old daughter thinks I should be on TikTok. I'm like, I cannot answer that yet. Here's where we are in the process. We have got to define who you appeal to and why and what their problem is and what you are selling them before I can advise you if you should be on TikTok and what you should be saying. So yes, tactics have their place, but they are so much easier to decide on and to measure when you write the rest first, because it writes itself, right? Like, it's not rocket science to figure out if you're going after a 25-year-old that you should be on TikTok. But if you're going after a 45-year-old, that's just chasing some random trend, probably for the wrong reason. And obviously we get more specific than demographics, but it's also, I think, a better way to measure your success on those channels. Marketers are just beating their heads against the wall, trying to figure out how to measure everything nowadays. I think, yes, there are efficiency measures. There are ways to do paid advertising that make you money and that don't make you money. And you should leverage the experts for that. But the real reason you're doing it, you should know, what is the strategic role that this plays in my messaging hierarchy? And that you can measure in much different ways than whatever the latest and greatest ROAS standard is.
Yeah, that is wonderful. I'm going to put that on our wall. And I think that the other piece I wanted to ask about is social is obviously just one piece, right? It's like, what are some of the other things that, not just emerging, but even small brands, like, your 40 million, I don't know, is 40 million a small, right?
Yeah, I go very small now. I talk to people that are just launching because in addition to redoing brands that were huge and failing, I also led innovation. So I started from scratch many times. I like creating new brands with people, and I'm working on a couple of them right now. So it can be far below 40 million for me to work on it.
Yeah.
So different tactics beyond social, you're saying?
Yeah.
I just got a pitch for direct mail the other day. I mean, I think a lot of things are not dead that we think are dead. It all depends on what you're trying to do. And people get frustrated when I say that, but there is no right answer. There's things like Instagram that the majority of the population that's going to potentially buy most of these products we're talking about is on, right? But I don't know exactly who you're trying to reach with what message and how much your competitors are in that space and your ability to stand out and the relative attention cost difference of doing so versus direct mail. Just hypothetically, I don't know that until we get in there, and then it kind of maps itself. I mean, I like thinking with a blue sky of here's your story. Now, how can we tell it? So, for example, I took over Clos du Bois wine, as you mentioned. It was the number one Chardonnay in the country, over $10, when Constellation had it. By the time Gallo acquired it, it had fallen to number 4. That's a big fall. And it had, the Constellation Gallo acquisition took years because of legal reasons. And so it had really been even further neglected during that time. And it was down substantial. When we dug in, it really didn't have many good bones either. It was 80% Chardonnay. Chardonnay is not a hot varietal, right? It's a declining varietal. Still very large varietal, but it's thought to be kind of over the hill for old people. A lot of times, even for old people, they say it's for old people. There was not much love, even among people who bought the brand on a regular basis for the brand. They didn't even kind of recognize different labels when we showed them, is this the label? No, I think it's this one. Like, it was really in tough shape. We had to revitalize it, and our average age consumer was 60. We weren't going to go after 60-year-olds. There's not that long of a runway. I hope plenty of 60-year-olds drink it, but that was not going to be our core target who we wanted to kind of revitalize this brand with. Nor were 25-year-olds, right? Like, we had to pick something that was achievable given the brand that we were working with and the varietal and who drank it. So we went after approximately 45-year-olds with it as the core target. Now, where we went, and you may have seen it, it's one of my proudest campaigns and repositionings I've worked on with the amazing team that I worked with. We embrace the elephant in the room. And I like embracing elephants. I really like, I should name my company Embracing Elephants. Never ignore the tension. You have to have tension. And if there's tension that you're ignoring, that everyone knows when they look at you, they just know you're looking past the real story and you're just trying to sell yourself, right? The tension is that Chardonnay was lame and it was for old people. So coming out with a campaign about, people dancing in daisy fields or going to a, 30-year-old showing up in a club with Chardonnay, it's just not believable. Like, it's not going to overcome my real objection, which is that even if I like Chardonnay, I kind of hide it behind my back as I walk into a party. And that was real. That was happening. What we did was we went all in on old people, and we went to the extreme. We hired 80 and 90-year-olds for our messaging. And we embraced the fact that what do we love about 80 and 90-year-olds? They don't give a crap, right? Like, they're super confident. They know what they like. They let anything out of their mouth. We aspire to be people that can be that comfortable in their own skin. And so how could Clos grab onto that as the lamest of the lame brands in that varietal that was known for old people? We had a message that was called long live knowing what you like and sticking with it. Long live this, long live that. And it was also kind of a cheers moment. It was all about Chardonnay. And it took what Clos was known for, which was a little bit of that yellow border, and it blew it up into a modern and fresh look. And then we put it on everything. So if our target was 45-year-olds ish who aspirationally were looking for this confidence cue, and older people than that loved it too, and younger people than that loved it too. Everyone loves the grandma who DGAF, right? And it's still a product for me, it feels like. So it's not about like, okay, where should we put this campaign? We could have put it anywhere, but there's so many legs that just come out of that. It was ripe for PR. There's lots of ageism in advertising, and we love to emulate the young in this country. It was ripe for that. Courtney Cox volunteered to direct our spot. She pitched us because here's an actress that's kind of aging in Hollywood and feeling the effect. She was so passionate about this. So that's just a long-winded example of how the idea and your brand essence drives where you're going to put things, and it can't be the other way around.
That's beautifully articulated. Thank you. And everybody's talking or has been talking, or maybe I should say a lot of people are talking about storytelling. And yet you see sort of these misfires with storytelling, and you're like, that's not really a story. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Or there are too many stories and they compete with each other. Like, what is the role of storytelling for these brands that you work with?
Yeah, I think everything is story. I'm a StoryBrand certified guide. Donald Miller's StoryBrand book 2.0 just came out. You should read it if you haven't already. It's amazing. But it's always the way that I've approached things. Consumers are the hero, not you. First of all, if you ever find yourself writing a story where you're the hero, stop. Because that is a clear indication that it is not a story that anyone's going to care about. So this is the same thread we see through all of your favorite books, all your favorite movies. This is what we see with political candidates. You have to be the hero. The consumer has to be the hero. We are the hero for politicians usually. I'm fighting for you sort of thing, message. You'll see it everywhere once you start looking at this. There needs to be a clearly defined problem about why your consumer can't get what they want. What is standing in their way? And this isn't about, I can't get a good Chardonnay. This is about, I don't feel comfortable drinking what I like when I go to a party because it's thought to be lame. Or an even deeper human desire. I wish I could be that comfortable in my own skin. Dove Real Beauty, with all of the brands that you find so compelling have a very clear problem solution framing, and the consumer is the hero that can't get what they want. Every movie. Having a relatable founder, having a good product origin story, all of that is wonderful. But you have to make your audience feel something too. People remember things that they feel. They remember people that are approachable. And they will latch onto solutions to their problems or solutions to an aspiration that they haven't been able to achieve yet. But they have to identify with it first. Like I said, in the first 2 seconds, you decide if something is for you enough to continue to even give it your attention, right? You may decide it's still not after 5 minutes, but you rule out 80% of what you see in the first 2 seconds because you just don't have enough attention in your brain to give to absolutely everything you look at. So I think the role of storytelling is absolutely crucial. And that's why after deciding what you stand for in your positioning, we immediately go into story, which then brings you to your messaging pillars and you're off to the races.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautifully put. What about when you're working with these brands or brands that you watch or that you've seen, wherever, what are some of the mistakes that you see kind of commonly being made?
Generic messaging by far and away. It's like you don't know that anybody else is saying that same thing. Like look around, do an audit of what your competitors are saying, what your competitors' packaging looks like, and don't do the same thing. I think that's mistake number one. Chasing trends without a unique point of view or reason for doing so, like it's just throwing your money away. Now you have to stay relevant. I'm not saying like you should still be sticking with advertising on cable TV necessarily, just to avoid chasing trends, but don't move until there's a reason to do so. And not knowing your consumer deeply enough. You've really got to be out there. I went to BevNet Live, for instance, in December, paid out of my own pocket. My main reason was to hear founders' problems firsthand. And I was scribbling down information the whole time. I want to know it in their words. I want to hear the angst and the problems they're asking the speakers about. You have to stay connected to your potential consumer. If your potential consumer is all over TikTok, you need to be reading what they're talking about, what they're complaining about. If you are a student of humanity out in the stores, doing your own sampling sometimes, be learning what bothers these people, and you'll constantly be ahead of your competitors.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And now when you see, some of these brands, you're working with, or the ones you watch, they're starting to gather some steam, they're getting scale. How do they not lose that realness, that authenticity, and their voice as they're getting bigger?
I think you have to stay anchored to your core values. I mean, that is why I love it. I think very, very hard, and we often test even with consumers these positioning maps and positioning documents. And they do not just go in a binder to be redone by the next brand manager. They go up on your wall and they go to guide every single decision you make. You have to be very, very clear on what your core values are. And they have to, they're not just words on a page. They have to permeate every customer decision you have to make. Every we're going to be out of stock, what should we do decision you have to make. Those core brand values are just an extension of your ecosystem without losing your identity. So should you go into cans versus a glass bottle? Should you latch onto alcohol-free if you're a winery? All of these decisions are easier when you are super clear on what you stand for and to who. It's like without that map, you're just flying blind trying to make tactical decisions constantly. And as you scale, you're going to get pressured in a way that you didn't maybe differently, certainly than when you were small. And you can certainly evolve them over time, but be choiceful and thoughtful about it, driven by your very clear map of what made you successful in the first place.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It makes me think about, I've been recently doing vision work and core value work again. And I know Gino Wickman with his whole EOS system talks about which you said earlier, which I loved, was like everybody row in the same direction, but you can't row in the same direction if you don't know what the vision is and if you don't know what the values are. And then values become so important also,
right.
Not just with strategic decisions like that, but hiring decisions.
Yep.
Are you going to work with a certain supplier?
Yep.
Are you going to work with this agency? It really is amazing that the values should. There's a tea company that I used to really, I suppose I still like them, but I used to really love. And I loved their ginger turmeric tea. Loved it, loved it. You could probably guess who it is, but and recently, like I'm like, it doesn't taste the same. It just doesn't taste the same. And I'm like, I wish I could go back to look at the old pod, or what do you call a sachel, and look at the new one, because I guarantee you that something has changed. It just doesn't taste the same, right?
Yeah.
When you look at the core values of that company, they wanted to give you this amazing bursting flavor. Was not there anymore. But what happened?
Right. And as you're making decisions like that and trade-offs that you never had to make before, if you can't be rigid about everything, right? You have to stay somewhat flexible as you're scaling. There's going to be things that do not go the way you expect, but you cannot lose sight of what you said your values were and your core value proposition that you offer to who. You cannot. You should shut down before you give up on that. When you look at so many brands that are like, what are they even doing anymore? Like Starbucks. I just came from Starbucks. I'm just a constant student of Starbucks. What are you even providing and to who anymore? If you just start making willy-nilly decisions and compromising on things, and you have to compromise on some things, but they cannot be things that are so important to what you are delivering. What are you really selling, quote unquote? What that tea company was really selling is bursting flavor that's more intense than your competitors, and then they compromise on the bursting flavor. You can't do that. Like, maybe you can compromise on the fabric of the satchel, if that is not such a core thing that you sell and that you offer. But you have to know what your differentiators are and what you are known for and promising.
It's great advice. It's great advice. Now let me ask you this: what trends are you excited about in the beverage space?
Oh, beverage is so fun. That's why I'm still in it to such a degree. I remember back in it's probably the early 2010s, I was doing a store walk with my general manager, and we were just starting to notice the blurring of categories. And I remember pointing that out. There's a big finding on that survey. We got the beers that were being like bourbon barrel aged, for instance. And I stole that idea and brought it to wine for the first time with Apothic, which resulted in bourbon barrel aged wine. But the blurring of categories now is like 1,000-fold more than that. Where does alcohol end and non-alc begin? You got no, low, and full. Where does functional, even within the non-alc space, of course, Coca-Cola has always been non-alc. We've always had non-alc, orange juice, water, etc. Now you've got adult beverage alternative non-alc, which is 100% marketing. It's all how you frame it, the occasion, to who and what problem you're solving, versus Minute Maid orange juice, right? Like that's one of the original non-alcs. And then you got different types of function coming in. Alcohol is not the only substance that can give you a physical effect and feeling. There are so many different things now that can. And this whole like mishmash of all these factors is just waiting to be flushed out. Consumers can't make sense of it. Retailers and distributors aren't making sense of it. Therefore, the shelf set's a mess. People are scrambling for it. They know that there's something there, but they don't really know how it should be structured and different price points and occasion. It's chaos. And so much of it is marketing and branding and kind of owning your differentiator. So all of this makes it such an exciting time to be in the beverage industry.
I have been so obsessed with sparkling beverages, for probably the last 30 years. And when in the early 2000s, when Prosecco was first sort of making its entrance into the U.S. market in a big way, all the way to sparkling hemp beverages and sparkling adaptogens and this and that and the other.
Yeah.
One thing that I've noticed is that a lot of times the marketing is so good. It's so good. It's like I wouldn't even thought about picking up that product. I won't name the product, but there's a product that's at Target. I picked up the product. It's got beautiful purple branding. It's just like so well described. I take it home and it's shit. It's so bad, and it's like
it's such a waste.
It doesn't taste good. It doesn't. The flavor's not there. There's like the stevia is just hitting you in the head.
Yeah,
and I'm like, that's a wonderful example of the wrong marketing. I'm sorry, the wrong product.
It's just
the right
wasted
marketing.
Good marketing. You just wasted all that money and that beautiful packaging. You have to have a good product. Like all of this goes without saying. There's no excuse for not having a good product nowadays. We have the best technology. We can make a paper towel taste like ranch. Like, have a good product. And no, I told that to my kids the other day. There was this lunch menu for their school, and those silly calendar lunch menus of what they're going to serve. And one of them said ranch flavored carrots. And I'm like, I pray to God that's a typo, and it's not. It's really carrots with ranch, because if we're flavoring carrots like ranch, I am just terrified for the future. But yeah, we have no reason to not have a delicious product, which consumers still cite as the number one reason they drink things. The problem is what's delicious to you may not be what's delicious to me, but a product that delivers on your proposition is an absolute ante.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I'm trying to think who said it. Maybe it was Peter Jalansas that said it, or Eric Martindale, the people that I'm always reading their stuff, about, hey, when you see a founder going, oh my gosh, and there's one particular founder that I'm thinking of, I got onto Sprouts. I'm in so many Sprouts, right? And it's like, okay, the first thing is that someone got thrown out. So that you got in, right? There's only so much space for emerging brands. And then, oh, by the way, you got thrown out of Fresh Time, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what are you doing in terms of introspection as a founder to think about, like, why didn't it not work out? It's like, I've got
and your channel choice, and this is why I do go to market too. Your channel choice tells a story. Again, this was a key part of the Coke Zero story. When I came onto Coke Zero, it had just been launched like 4 months prior by the innovation team. And of course, Coke can get you in 99% of distribution tomorrow, but then you got to prove that you're going to stay there. We were already getting kicked out. We were in 99% of distribution, but we did not have the velocity. No one knew the brand. We were getting kicked out, which is so much harder than getting in the first time to try to get in again, right? Or try to beg them to keep you there. What we did is we ended up extending the story with where we fought to keep our distribution and push further into distribution. So, for example, food service, taps, the fountain drinks, such a great opportunity for trial, right? The problem is Subway, for instance, does not want to use those precious 6 valves for new and emerging brands that may not make it, right? Like these are core brand, big brand, high volume placements. And Coca-Cola is not set up to do trial on every new brand either on fountains. There's thousands of dollars of valve reset fees and all this stuff. So long story short, and there's a whole lesson to be learned on how we were able to do it, but we fought that. We fought that system. We funded what we needed to fund because we believe so strongly in the ability to get on a tap. Now, we did not want to get on the tap in the restaurants where it's behind the counter, where you just on autopilot ordering number one, right? And it's mostly drive-through. We wanted to get on the tap in the quick serve restaurants where you got a cup of ice and you're staring at what you're going to get and you're about to get your Coke, but right next to it is a black Coke Zero that has a warning sign that says, warning, may easily be confused with full sugar Coke, right? Like every touch point is an ability to showcase your story and to further that. And if you just get a little tiny sample, you take a sip, you don't like it, you can just go right next to it and get a Coke. There's no risk. We eliminated the risk. So that is an example of a strategic channel choice that furthers your story, even though it's not easy, versus just saying, I want to be everywhere. And, 6 one, half done the other. I'll get kicked out of one. I'll get another one tomorrow. You're just wasting your time and energy and not furthering your story.
I mean, my friend Arshad Bal of Amrita Brand says, you have to, as a founder, think about it sustainably. It's like, hey, at the end of the day, I still got to feed my family. I still got to pay my team. I still keep going. But now let's talk about the Outlier initiative. Like let's say there's some founders that are listening, or they come across a snippet on LinkedIn. How can they find you? How can they work with you? What's it going to be like?
Yeah. So I am easily found on LinkedIn. I think that we came across each other on LinkedIn via one of Sam's shows that was live cast on LinkedIn. So Courtney O'Brien on LinkedIn, the Outlier Initiative, and be careful, there's a lot of I's there. I didn't realize that till after I named my company that. You can easily spell it wrong. The outlierinitiative.com. And it's named that because I make brands outliers. Like you don't want to be like the herd. You want to be the one that wins, and only about 5% stick around. How to work with me, I've got some thought starters on my website in terms of kind of off-the-shelf solutions that can be customized to different brands. Pretty much everything I do starts with competitive positioning, finding your differentiation and what space you're going to own that's true to you, and really working with the founder to make sure the authenticity and the true brand nature comes out. We usually then move into messaging strategy, and then often a marketing plan, a marketing strategy to bring it to life in whatever channels you're in, and to your consumer. And then I can go all the way through execution by working with experts that I bring in.
That's amazing. Courtney, you have led such an interesting life. You are an outlier yourself. I mean, how do you take care of yourself?
I don't do it well enough, to be honest. I have 3 young kids who I try to set a good example for. I am an outlier in that I do not live in a place that, a lot of movers, shakers live. I live in the cowboy capital of the world, self-proclaimed. I don't know that we ever entered any contest to get that award, but it's on every city sign. I live in a cowboy town out in rural California, where there's more cows than people probably. And it keeps me kind of thinking right side up, the Sierra Mountains are right there. It's just beautiful foothills. That means a lot to me, kind of to balance out the intense kind of thought work and the always on nature of being an entrepreneur in social media.
Oh, wait, is that in Texas or California?
California.
Okay.
There's still wine vines growing everywhere. There's still grapevines everywhere. We're in California.
I'm gonna guess it's not Fresno.
No, God, no.
Is it Oakdale?
Yeah, you didn't just guess that. You must have known that.
I've spent some time in California. Man, there are a lot of cowboys there.
Yes,
There are.
we have a huge rodeo. Yep.
Courtney, I'm gonna share a secret with you. Maybe I already told you, but I originally came to America to be a cowboy, so I'll have to come and visit you one day.
I do not remember hearing that. That is brilliant. That's awesome.
So you are on fire, I'm guessing, and so you don't always take all the steps you need to take care of yourself because you're here to change the world.
Exactly. Yeah, my aunt used to say, "I'll sleep when I'm dead."
My dad said that too.
I mean, I do highly value my sleep, but yeah, and when you're doing something you love, it is so easy to just work more hours than you were intending. But yeah, I am here to change the world.
I mean, everyone listening, please check out the outlieriniative.com. It has 5 I's in it, so make sure you count your I's. Don't worry about the T's, but just count the I's. And this has been, I mean, just an amazing conversation. I always learn something, but I think I learned so much more than any other episode. What an incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing all this amazing experience from Clos de Bois and Coke and Apothic and your insights on positioning, on branding and startup strategy. I feel like I mean all these episodes are required listening for the for the Firebelly team. But I'm telling them you got to listen to this one. You got to listen to this one twice. So,
thank you. It's a pleasure.
And for those of you that are at an emerging food or beverage brand looking for the kind of strategy, that turns challengers into leaders, you definitely got to check Courtney out. And of course, a huge thank you to Firebelly Marketing for sponsoring today's episode. If your brand is ready to take social media to the next level, visit firebellymarketing.com. That's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much, Courtney. This has been just lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Duncan. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Firebelly Social Show. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.